All right, so in this one, we want to create a comment thread. The comment thread itself is not going to be a whole lot different than the post detail view. The only difference is going to be whether or not the thread is the parent or the child. So basically, if you have a link for a thread, no matter what comment you go to, it will show the parent comment on top and then all of the replies below. And that's really important for a thread to make it just that much more usable. Now, so essentially what we're going to be doing is putting this as its own page. So this whole section here as its own page on its own link, which is also really good for sharing. So if there were a lot of comments on something in particular, then you could share those comments or that thread at any point. Much like what we do on joincfe.com, we actually have that same sort of thread for all of our comments specifically for this reason, is because then it's like, hey, have you seen this thread? Or also when you're rendering like notifications or something, it's like, hey, have you seen this thread? That's one of those really important things with this in particular, this topic in particular. So let's go ahead and jump into our comments app. And we're going to make a new file in here called urls.py. And we're going to copy the post's URL. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this entire thing and put it into comment URLs. The reason I'm copying the whole thing is because it's still going off of CRUD. We're still doing a lot of the same sort of things that we did in CRUD itself. The main part here, though, I'm not going to actually go into edit. You already know enough with post update on how you can do edit. I'm also not going to do create or list. So we're not going to list all those things out. It's just getting a lot of like kind of redundant details that we just don't need. But I do want to have the detail view, which is actually going to be called thread. So we're going to call it a comment underscore thread as opposed to create or detail. And then, of course, we need to create this view at some point. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it into the import there. And then we're also going to get rid of, or the post delete one is another one that we will need to do, but I'm actually going to comment out in a second. I will delete these other ones though, the other comments that we just, again, not going to cover because they are fairly straightforward and not a whole lot different to what we've already seen. So let's go ahead and comment out the delete one, and I'll again call it comment delete. That is something that we actually do want to have just in case. And another nice thing about having delete versus also having update is if they actually wanted to change their comment, they could just delete the one that they created and then create a new one. Okay, cool. So now that we've got this, we now need to create this actual comment thread view. Notice that we have this slug here, though. I actually don't want it to be slug. Instead, I want it to be the primary key, which is also known as the ID. So you can use ID here. And more specifically, we want to keep it at ID. And then all I'm going to do here is just do /d+. So that's for a digit. So basically any digit that can come in here, because the ID for any model is going to be a digit. So now we have this. We want to create this view here. So inside of our views function for comments, we're going to create this comment thread view. And it's going to return render. And it's going to be request. And I'm just going to call it comment thread.html. And we'll just put an empty context here first. So let's go ahead and make this HTML document, and we'll go into templates, new file, and we're going to call it comment thread.html. Much like post detail, I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of post detail, paste it in here, and we're just going to leave it as that for now until we actually finish this comment thread. So let's actually check out this URLs. One more thing we need to do for this in particular is go into our main URLs and add in the comments URLs here. So again, comments. This is not a whole lot different from posts as we've seen, but I'm just adding comments in here now. So jumping back into our project, if we go into comments /1, we get an unexpected keyword argument of ID. So let's actually take a look at that URLs again. And we do have an ID here, so I just want to make sure that I saved it. If we go back into our views, this is the problem here. Right? So we have a function here, but it doesn't have ID as a parameter, so I just need to add in ID as one of those parameters, and now we have, it looks a lot like the post detail. Well, it should. It's just not showing anything here. So since we have this, just like what we've seen before, we can do get object or 404, and we can also import the model we need, which is the comment model. So from .models, import comment, and we are going to get the object. I'll just say object or obj equals to get object or 404, comment, and ID equals to ID. Now this right here, these are all coming through them together, right? So let's just call it something different. For now, I'm going to call it ABC, and then I'm going to go through every place that it needs to be called ABC. So that's going to be in the URL, it's going to be in the argument that's being passed into the actual function, and then it's going to be finally the lookup function that we have, which is get object or 404. We want to pass it in there as well. And I'm going to pass this in to our context. So I'm going to make a new context variable here, and I'll just say object is equal to obj, and then we'll use this context inside of our render function. And then in our comment thread.html, I'm just going to, at the very top, just do object. Okay, so we refresh in here, and now we see that we have the Unicode data or the string data from the model that's coming through here. So that's actually pretty good. If we actually wanted more of that comment stuff, we could do all sorts of things with it. In fact, we could scroll all the way down into this for comment and comments. This is actually what we're going to be emulating, the for comment and comments. So I'm just going to cut that out, just that one piece, and I'm going to delete everything else, except for the offset. Actually, I'll keep that offset div in there. So that's all I have is now this for comment and comments. Again, all of this stuff is coming from our post detail view. So I'm going to get rid of the for loop because there's only one comment. So each thread only has one comment. So I get rid of that for loop there. All right. So now if we refresh, we don't have really a whole lot to go off of other than this block quote is now showing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to change my context variable from object to comment. The reason for that is because we already have a lot of comment sort of data. So in my views, I'm going to change object here to comment. Really, really simple. Refresh, and now it's here is a comment. This is showing the actual comment. It does not have any children, so it's not showing any children. It does have this reply button, but since we're on the thread, we don't even need that reply button anymore. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that reply button, and I'm also going to get rid of the class of comment reply, which hides the children, and refresh in here, and then we will eventually need to bring that form back, but I'm not going to do it quite yet. So we do have this. Let's actually check out another comment. So if we go to the next comment, we have 2 more data, and then 3. Here's now a comment with sub-comments, right? It does say the number of comments that are below it. So that's kind of cool. It's actually starting to really take shape. We also no longer need this block quote on the main comment itself. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it, actually. We just want it on the replies. So if I refresh, now it's looking probably a little bit better. And then underneath the footer here, I'm going to add an HR line just to separate the main comment from all the sub-comments. We also don't necessarily need to show how many comments are there, but that's kind of a stylistic thing for you, but I am going to get rid of that last slash. So there we go. We now have this thread sort of working. The next thing that we're going to want to do is bring in that form. So we have the form in there too. So from .forms, import comment form. So I believe that's what it's called. Let's just double check. And yes, it is comment form. So back in here, we have comment form. So I want to add it as context as well. So form equals to comment form. And again, request.post or none. And we will add this in as our context. So form is form. And then on a comment thread, we have it as comment form here. We're just going to call this form. And we refresh, and now we actually have that form. So everything should be very, very similar to what we've seen before. Now that we've got this, let's actually go ahead and update our form to make sure that that's working as well within our view. Now, the view here is not going to be different than the detail view. So let's actually go ahead and go in to that detail view for all of this stuff right here. I'm going to go ahead and copy everything is valid in there. And we're going to bring that into our form in here. So if form is valid, then we are going to re-render and go back to all of this stuff. So there's something we need to import, and that's HTTP response redirect. So let's go ahead and import that. So from Django.http, import HTTP response redirect. Everything else I think should be fine. Actually, nope. This content type, we still need to import that as well. So going back into our views, we can import content type. And I'm also going to import messages as well. So I might as well just go ahead and grab those two things, bring in the views, and come in here. Now we've got our content type. So it looks like everything's actually imported. So content type and comment form. Cool. So that's looking good. Let's go back into our actual comment and we'll try a new one, another comment, and we'll hit reply. If we look at the code, we don't see any errors. Like it didn't actually render errors and a server error didn't happen. So that leads me to believe that maybe the form is not actually valid. So what I want to do is print out form.errors and see what's going on there. But I also want to print out the directory or what is available for the form, so we can see those two things. I kind of have a feeling as to know what it is, but I just want to do that just in case. So I'm going to try and resubmit the form again, hit continue. And if we look in the terminal, first of all, we see all of the different things that we can do on the form. So if we did form.errors, we would see it, or form.fields, or form.files, stuff like that. But here's the actual error list itself. And it says object ID, this field is required. Content type, this field is required. So we actually don't have those things in here. So let's look at the post itself. When we did it before, we actually had this initial data in here that was actually coming through. So this instance, this is coming off of the post detail. So this is the object that is related to the parent comment. That might be a little bit confusing, but basically what we need to do inside of our comment, we actually need to get the post or the content object's content type, as well as the content object's instance ID. So let's look back at the model for comment, and that's content object. So that's going to be the post model, right? So we actually have the comment itself. So we actually have that object. So we'll say the content object equals to object.content_object, and content ID equals to object.content_object.id. So let's going back into the view. We want this initial data here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And we're going to paste it right above the form. So we want to get the content type of the content object. And we already have the content ID. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab that. But I also don't need to do this because the comment itself already has a content type and should have a comment ID. So the original instance should have those things. So let's go ahead and look back at the model again. And we do. We have content type as well as object ID. And since we already have those, we can just go off of the comment type and object ID of the object itself. So object.content type and object and we called it object ID. Okay. So the reason I showed you this way is you could do it either way, but you want to make sure that you're getting the instance content object, and you could work off of that content object to get the ID and all that other stuff that we did in the view itself. So using object.content_object is the same thing as saying the post that the comment is on. And since we have this now, we can actually come in here and say initial equals to initial data, just like we did in the view, right? So we have that all in here. And now we shouldn't see those errors coming through. So I'm actually going to get rid of the printing out of this stuff. And we'll come back into our form and we're going to resubmit it. And it looks like maybe it didn't submit. Let's try it again. It looks like there's still some errors coming through. So let's try that one more time. And we'll come back, refresh, continue. And we have, let's go ahead and reply. It doesn't look like any errors are actually showing up now. Which is good, but it's also not coming through on our actual form. So let's just refresh, or actually, better yet, I'm going to restart the server, refresh in here, and say another comment, hit reply. It does actually work. So it actually took me back to that other thing, but did it actually give me the right one, right? So we have different dates and stuff like that. So it looks like it actually did the parent comment. If I refresh in here, I now have 10 comments. The most recent one is another comment. So that's 10. So if I go ahead and go to that comment itself, let's take a look. So we'll do comments/10, and it's saying no comment matches the given query. So we were at 4, I believe, or maybe it was 5. Nope. Let's try 3. And there it is. So respond to new data and another comment. So the other comments, it's actually not showing up as far as the comment is concerned when it is not the parent comment. So that is something else that we'll need to work on. But for now, we actually have a comment thread, so we can use this thread for each individual comment. So the model itself, we can create a get absolute URL, and that's what we should do. So underneath the string and Unicode functions, we're going to do def get absolute URL, and it's going to return self, and we want to return reverse, and this is going to be comments / comment thread, and then keyword args equals to ID is self.id. So we need to import reverse. And if you forgot where it was, you can go back into our other models and just go ahead and import that reverse function and bring this in here. Save that and refresh. Now that we have that comment, we should be able to actually add it into our comment thread for posts, or the post detail. So let's go into post detail, and for the parent comment, so that is right up here, we're going to add the thread right next to reply. And I'll just say thread. I'm going to get rid of the class that's on there because we don't need that class, because that's not an accurate class for it. And then the URL itself is going to be comment. So comment.get absolute URL. Save that, refresh into our actual post. So let's actually go to a post, and we click on this, and now we have a thread. So I can click on the thread, and it's actually not bringing me where it should. So let's go back into our comment model, get absolute URL. This looks fine. Let's go ahead and rerun that again, refresh, click on any of these threads. It doesn't look like it's actually coming through. So, there's the problem. I did get absolute instead of just get. Let's try that again. And we've got an error with the keyword arguments. So maybe it's not comment underscore thread, but just thread. And all of this can be validated by our URLs. Yep, URL name is thread. And then the namespace itself, if we look at the blog, is comments. So that's kind of something that you probably should do when you're testing things, but we're going through it quickly because you've already done this before. Refresh, and we still don't have the reverse for thread with ABC. Okay, so there's our first issue, is we changed all those things to ABC. So let's go back into and change them back to what they should be, which is ID everywhere it should be. ID, ID, and ID. We refresh now. If I click on thread, now I can actually go to each individual comment thread that is a parent. And notice that if I try to go to that same sort of thread for something that isn't a parent, it gives us page not found. So that's okay. That's not necessarily what we want to happen, but it is something that at least adds that usability where it's not going to a child's thread. Cool. So if you have any questions on comment thread, let us know. Do realize that we did definitely do the same sort of stuff here that we did inside of the post view. That's not necessarily the best thing, but it is something that works well for us as far as creating the things that we need to create. If you have any questions on what we did here, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.